What's the latest science saying about the flow state, about what that is, where your mind just decides to kind of get into this groove where feels effortless and the results kind of are there,
Yeah, this is kind of the holy grail, right? Like everyone's trying to figure out how to turn that on. Because if you could turn
right?
that on, just imagine, at will. There's kind of two different approaches to that. There's the psychological approach and the neuroscientific approach. So on the neuroscience side, which I'm a little more familiar with, there's a lot of work trying to understand what are the brain chemicals that are produced during exercise, what are their various effects. And it's actually there's lots of debate going on because there's a lot of chemicals that get produced during exercise. It used to be assumed that runner's high, when people started talking about it in the 70s, it was like, oh, it's adrenaline or it's endorphins, which is your body's natural version of basically of opioids. Of like it hits the same receptors as morphine or whatever. But then there's also endocannabinoids, which hit the same receptors as your body's inside your body as cannabis does. We produce all these chemicals and we produce them preferentially when we exercise. And so there are various camps in the research world that would say runner's high is when you're running at a level, or you're exercising at a sustained intensity and duration such that you get a really high level of one of these chemicals, whether it's endocannabinoids or endorphins or, and there's a few others. There's GABA. There's a whole cocktail of chemicals. So I think everyone's subjective experience of a good run is slightly different because everyone produces a different mix of chemicals. Now, when you go from the psychology side and you think about things, there's a big literature on the concept of flow, right? Getting into the flow state. And there's more to it than just chemicals, right? Because it's not just a question of put you on a treadmill, dial it up to a certain intensity, and you're going to be in flow state. Flow, there's a lot of different criteria that people talk about for what it takes to get in flow state. But, one of the key things seems to be that the difficulty is a good match for your abilities. So it's not easy. Like it's not something that you can do without thinking about it, but it's not so hard that you're going to get discouraged. That there's this sort of perfect match and you're able to, and then sort of your concept of time disappears. And so it's this idea of getting engaged in a task. So I think the neurochemistry is real and relevant, but I think there's also something about getting on the psychological side that's more than just neurochemistry. It's this that gets into, having a goal and feeling that it's attainable but not easy, so it's going to be satisfying, and the complexity is just enough that it keeps you engaged without getting you you know too intimidated or whatever. And so I think people who've had a good workout, or whether in whatever domain that is, I think a lot of those boxes get checked. That it's something that's hard but not too hard, where you're really bringing to bear all of your skill and your experience, and you feel like you're achieving mastery. And yeah, I think it's one of the reasons people end up coming back and becoming lifelong athletes. That feeling is hard to be.
Yeah, it certainly feels good, and it's we're always chasing it, especially once you've got a little taste, chasing the dragon. You
That's
want
right.
to get back there and be like,
It's a better dragon to chase than some.
exactly,
There are
than
worse
heroin
addictions.
or whatever. I've got one last question here. When I was running or doing something, and you see this even at the drive-in range when people are warming up, it's like, what's your personal and professional kind of opinion or take when it comes to using something in your ears? So like I sometimes will run because I want to be efficient. I want to listen to an audiobook. That's how I got introduced to you. Or I'm like, this is a good use of my time if I'm running for 2-3 hours or whatever it might be, that I can really feel like I'm being productive. But then there's another part of me that's like, well, you know what? I also really like to run with absolutely nothing, just silence, because then I can really hear myself, and you almost kind of get into that meditative, hearing just the crunch of your feet and whatever it might be. And you see this at the driving range as well on the professional tours, where the guys, will have headphones on, some won't. Some are trying to tune out all the distractions. Some are trying to almost practice allowing them in and performing anyway. What's your take on the benefits of when you are training and you're trying to get better at everything you're doing, is using something in your ears or not?
I think it can cut both ways. And I think so in the running world, there used to be a real dichotomy between the grizzled hardcore veterans who said that, listening to music while you run is just you're soft or whatever. That's not real. Runners don't listen to music. And then the joggers out there who had their Discman or whatever and were listening to tunes. And
I remember those days at Discman. Nice.
yeah,
we're,
it's,
we're dating ourselves here, but yeah, that was great.
having the music skipping.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think really in the last 5-10 years, that distinction has finally evaporated, because you go to the Olympics, you go to the World Championships, you'll see lots of very, very fast runners who are out there right up until the moment before the race, listening to their tunes, and they may be doing that during training too. Now, from a sort of performance or science perspective, what I would say, okay, first of all, there's not a ton of research on this, but from the conclusion that I sort of take from the little research there is that going back to this concept we talked about at the beginning, this idea there's a central kind of master dial of effort that determines how you're doing. Listening to music distracts you a little bit. It gives you something else to think about it. So you're not thinking about how hard you're breathing or how much your legs hurt. This probably in a lot of contexts will make the effort feel a little bit easier. So it can make, let's say for a given effort, let's say you go out and run 10K at a certain pace. It might feel a little bit easier with music